Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about terrestrial ecology. This is going to be covered in chapter 3. It's a really dense chapter with a lot of information, so we're going to break it down into several different lectures. Alright, so the first thing we have to do is we have to go through some basic definitions. So when we are talking about ecology, this is going to be the base of this course because you really need to understand ecology to be able to understand how interactions occur between the environment and between humans. So ecology is a study of interactions. That's a really important word. So in your notes, I'd like you to circle that. And then among organisms, like within their own species group, and then between organisms, different species, and their environment. Okay, so you have a lot of different interactions that go on between different species groups and within a species group. So for example, let's talk about chipmunks. Chipmunks have relationships with each other, and they interact with each other, they compete with each other, but then you have some other organisms that might fulfill similar roles, like mice or squirrels, who are going to be gathering things, living in trees or little burrows, and so there's going to be interactions between them as well. And of course, they're all interacting with their environment because that's what they are dependent upon for their survival. So ecology is going to be organized into a wide range of kind of areas of study. And so organismal ecology describes relationships between an organism and its environment. Whereas if you're going to study population ecology, you're going to focus on one species and their interactions between each other and their environment in a particular area. Whereas if you're going to look at like the broader population ecology, you're going to now look at the dynamics of how everything changes over time and all the factors, including both the environmental factors and the anthropogenic factors that are affecting the distribution, abundance, and survival of this particular population. All right, so a population is going to be a group of the same species living in a certain area, and then a community is a set of different populations. So for example, a population would be all the squirrels that live on campus, or we could say Santa Fe, or we could even say central New Mexico, etc., etc. Whereas a community is going to be all the squirrels, all the birds, all the trees, the different plants, all of that lives on our campus or within Santa Fe or, New Mexico, etc. So when you're studying community ecology, you are getting much more complicated because you're not just looking at one population. You are now looking at multiple populations. You have to consider how they interact within their population as well between populations and their environment. So community ecology is a much more complex ecology study. Okay, so we have populations, we have communities. They will all live within an ecosystem. All right, an ecosystem is going to be all the communities that are there, all right, and how they interact with the biotic and the abiotic factors. So what does biotic mean? Biotic means living. Abiotic, putting that A in front of it negates it, so that means non-living. And so communities, how they interact with each other, as well as how they interact with the non-living items. What would be the non-living items? These would be things such as the air. Oh, there we go. See if I can write with this. The water. Right, the rocks and minerals. Okay, and things like that. Okay. All right, so when you're looking at ecosystem ecology, you have to be very broad. So this is why you're going to be looking for patterns. Flow of energy, flow of nutrients, how things are working through the systems of that ecosystem itself. Okay, so here's kind of a breakdown of this. We can start all the way down at molecules, and groups of molecules make cell, groups of cells make tissues, groups of tissues make up an organism, a group of organisms within the same species that live in the same area as a population. Different populations that live together in a certain area are communities. Communities and this non-living surroundings is an ecosystem. And then the part of Earth that contains all the ecosystems is known as the biosphere. So you can start tiny and you can end up enormous with the levels of organization of ecology. Okay, so let's get down into the nitty-gritty here. All right, what's a habitat? This is something you probably have known for a long time. Probably learned it in pretty early in elementary school. But habitat is the way that an organism is going to relate to its environment and find a place to live. So the living and non-living elements surrounding an organism. All right, so again, we can also put this as biotic and abiotic elements surrounding an organism. Okay, so if you were, again, let's refer to squirrels, they're one of my favorite animals. They're going to perhaps be living in a tree. All right, it's one of their favorite places. It's nice and safe. But they're also going to be interacting with different things around them. If they're living in the soil, they're not going to be living in a living, their habitat's not in a living organism. It's going to be in a non-living element of the ecosystem. There's living elements in the soil, but the basic, the sand, the dirt itself is non-living. All right, habitat use is non-random. These organisms are extraordinarily specific at picking out where they're going to live. All right, so their habitat selection is going to be based on their needs, right? They need to be close to food, they need protection, they need to have available mates. All right, so here are some different habitats. On the far right, we have a plant, okay? And this is a tropical plant, and the plant the base of each leaf, and these are very thick leaves, come to kind of an end at the stalk where they attach. And in there's a space for water to fill up. And so frogs love to live in these spaces because it's very safe. And they have the water that will allow them to stay in a moist environment and keep their skin, which dries out very rapidly, also very moist. So this is a really great choice for a tropical frog. This frog in particular is found in Madagascar. If we look at the top left, we see a thermal pool. This is a pool located in Yellowstone National Park. This water is extraordinarily hot. You would burn yourself if you tried to touch it. Now, what's interesting about this pool is it's also a habitat for bacteria and actually some insects right on the edge. You notice in the middle it's blue, and then out here it's yellow, and in between it's green, which makes sense because when blue and yellow come together they make green. What the colors are coming from are those bacteria that can live in different temperatures. So in the center, the water is the hottest, and as it goes out it gets shallower because it's coming up to the surface more, and so it cools off. So if some of these pools would actually have red around the outside as well. The temperature determines which bacteria can live there, and the bacteria themselves determine the colors that you see. So the area where you see the green, it is a mixture of the blue bacteria and the yellow bacteria living in an environment where the water is a little bit cooler than where it's all blue and a little bit hotter than where it's all yellow. So you have a mixture of those different populations of bacteria. These are different species of bacteria, and so they create these wonderful rainbow kaleidoscopes of color in these hot thermal pools. If the pool is clear, All right, sometimes you'll see them where they're blue, but then in the middle, in the deepest part, it's clear. It's because it's too hot to support any life. And down here you have a pitcher plant. All right, the inside of this pitcher plant is kind of slippery, and what happens is you have insects land on here and they slip in and they fall into this liquid. This liquid has digestive enzymes in it, and so this pitcher plant is actually a carnivorous plant. And so there's actually a spider that lives down in these. They put a little air bubble around themselves, so they are not actually digested, but they're a little tricky because when an insect falls in and falls into this liquid, the spider's down in the liquid and will grab that insect for itself rather than coming out of the pitcher plant and creating some sort of web. It's a very kind of sneaky approach, but it's fantastic because just think how protected that spider is in there. No one's going to go into digestive liquid to get the spider. All right, so those are examples of very, very specific habitats. Now this, we have a falcon, and it is living in a grassland area, a dry grassland area, not unlike what we would see in eastern New Mexico. Now this is a very specific habitat, even though this habitat is huge compared to the other habitats we've looked at. However, it is very specific, and it has been chosen very specifically because of its wide open areas that make hunting very easy. Okay, habitat is non-random. It's very specifically chosen. This is different than the niche. Now, some people will pronounce this word niche, and some people will pronounce it niche. The niche encompasses essentially who the organism is and its role in the environment, how it interacts with its environment, how does it use its resource. So its habitat is going to be a part of the niche, including, everything else about that organism that makes it the organism within this ecosystem. So a really simplified way of saying this is the habitat is going to be the address of the organism, and the niche is going to be the job. Okay, again, that's kind of anthropomorphizing it, but so niche encompasses all these things: habitat use, food consumption, role in the flow of energy and matter, and all the interactions with other organisms and the other abiotic factors. That's its niche. All right, and so here's this example. All right, habitat might be the address, niche is the profession. All right, some things to consider, all right? We have organisms in the world who are generalists. They are able to live in a wide variety of places. Their needs are across a broad range. Therefore, they don't need really specific things. They're not known to be specialists. Now, specialists are just like they sound. They have very specific requirements. And in their very specific niches, they're very, very, very successful. But you take them out of that niche and they really have a hard time. Very vulnerable to change. The polar bear would be an example of a specialist. All right, they're really struggling right now with Arctic warming up so fast. Rats would be a generalist, where rats can live almost anywhere and off of so many different things that there may not be as many of them in one location compared to a specialist, but they're over a broad range of locations. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to define two types of niches. All right, the fundamental niche is the full niche of a species. Everything it would ever need and interact with and perform and do everything, like essentially the utopia of niches. Well, that's not real life, right? There are other organisms out there that are going to take away and outcompete for different aspects of their niche. Okay, so the realized niche is the portion of the fundamentals niches that is actually going to be used by the species because of all these other interactions that are occurring that kind of whittle away at the edges of their niche. All right, some species have larger fundamental niches than others, and they would be generalists, and specialists are going to have much smaller niches because they have this really specific requirement. Okay, when you're a generalist, you have more options to adapt to changes or competition. It's the specialists who really suffer when these drastic changes come along. So the specialists in the world are suffering a great deal with this rapid, accelerated global climate change that the world is experiencing. But let's look at this, okay? We have a graph here. We have a resource 1 going on the on the x-axis. We have resource number 2 going on the y-axis. And this kind of orange blob here is species number 1's use of these resources and how the role that it fulfills in interacting with these resources. Okay, this is the fundamental niche. Let's go over here. You have species 2 and species 3. They're also using some of these resources. These resources we could think of as simply water and space. Okay, so these other species come in and they're using some of these resources too. Therefore, species 1 is never going to be able to have its full fundamental niche. So it's going to have its realized niche, which is significantly smaller. And as you get more and more species coming in and adding to this graph, because there's a lot of species that will live in a certain environment, every one of them is going to have their fundamental niche cut off a little bit more. So what do? They're going to have to partition out their niche. All right, so here is a tree. We have a bunch of birds on this tree. Well, how does this work? They all want to live here and use this tree, and it is a major part of their niche. So how can you do this without losing all the time? Well, let's take a peek. Here we have a woodpecker. This is a pileated woodpecker. This woodpecker is a big bird, and it is very loud. And they're because of their size, they're very strong, and they can dig deep into the wood and get these large insects. All right, so that is their part of their niche, right? Is their predation on these large insects on this tree. You have a white-breasted nuthatch who actually will start at the top of the tree and climb down, and it looks for insects that are on top of the tree bark, so on the surface of the tree. So these two birds are not competing with each other because they're looking for completely different resources. They're competing for some space on this tree, but because they're looking for different resources, they don't really have to worry about their interactions taking away any of their energy or their food source, etc. Over here on the right, we have the yellow-bellied sapsucker. They drill these holes in rows. You have probably seen this and didn't even realize what it was. And they consume sap from the tree, and they also will eat the insects that are stuck in the sap. So they'll actually put these holes in, let some sap drip out, drink up some of that sap, and then as insects land on it, they get stuck and they eat them too. So they're kind of a sweet, sap-covered treat for them. All right, so this type of bird is also not in competition with the nuthatch or the woodpecker. And now here we have this little bird, similar size to the nuthatch, who's also just on the surface looking for insects to eat. So it's kind of like, well, it's really in competition with this nuthatch. They're really overlapping their niches, but they've kind of evolved so that the brown creeper starts at the bottom of the tree, works its way up, whereas the nuthatch starts at the top and works its way down. So in that way, they're also partitioning out their niche, so they're going to have enough of their niche to keep them going. That is the end of this section, and so we'll see you for the next one. Thank you very much.